How's everybody doing? Great. Everybody survived lunch? Glad you all came back. That's good. All right. Wow. So when did DEI become a four-letter word? Wow. But fear not. It's this is a safe place. So we're gonna have a good conversation about DEI, what makes it work, and how you can make it work for you. So I'm gonna let the panel do some intros here.
Hello. Hi. I'm Cooper. I work at Talkspace, and I'm our Chief People Officer. And as I think about this from a DIEB perspective, so much of it is like what we do is provide therapy, right, and provide access to therapy. And so I'm a big believer in that kind of like that notion of eat what you cook, right? So not only do we try to support a diverse set of our members and those that are getting therapy, but we like to make sure our workforce and our internal culture is definitely representative of that and very inclusive in the way we do things. So happy to be here.
Good afternoon. My name is D.L. Morris. I am a commercial litigation partner at Hinshaw and Culbertson. It's based here in Chicago. I also practice outside of New York. And in my fun time, I am the diversity, equity, and inclusion partner for our firm, where I manage our nationwide culture initiatives across, I want to say, 12 different culture groups, a 15-person diversity committee, and a number of subcommittee engagements from there. I think during some of our prep time, they invited us to share an inclusion story, and going off script, I just want to share a quick shout out to my lunch table, actually, because I think we underestimate the power of simple hellos when we over-theorize inclusion. And so a shout out to Kawana, Scott, Jillian, Garvin, and Christy for just engaging in a great conversation over our lunch period.
Wow.
Well, now I have to follow that. Hi everyone, Melissa Healy. I use she, her, hers pronouns. For anyone who might need some visual support, I'm a white woman. I have curly brown hair. Today, I thankfully changed into a much longer dress because I don't have to worry about what y'all are seeing. And I have the coolest freaking job in the world. I work at Burnett. I am a former creative director. I pivoted my role, and now I get to be at the very intersection of people and who people are and their identity and what matters to them. Belonging is in my title. And then how you take all of that and you put it into the work and into what matters for people. How do we move brands forward so that they can move more into resonance, which I'll define in a later question.
Very good.
People cheering for you.
I know, right? Well, hello, everyone. I'm Jeanette Smith. I'm the Vice President of Diversity, Inclusion, Equity, and Belonging for Zurich, North America. And I have the pleasure of leading this very important work for this global company. And I'm the person that I look at and say, well, what about this? What about that? And I'm involved in so many different areas to ensure that we're truly driving a culture that is inclusive and really a place, we want Zurich to be recognized as a place that is a destination employer for people. So that's who I am.
Fantastic. So hello, everybody. My name is Pamay, Bassey. I use she, her, hers pronouns. I am the Chief Learning and Diversity Officer for the Kraft Heinz company, responsible for creating a culture of continuous learning, bold creativity, and intellectual curiosity through our training and learning initiatives, and amplifying the work that every Kraft Heinz employee does to create and nurture a diverse and inclusive workplace. I will talk about this a little bit later, but I love that I get to have responsibility for both learning and diversity, because I think a lot of richness happens at that intersection. Diversity, inclusion, equity, belonging, all of that is also a learning journey. When you're trying to make sure that leaders are inclusive leaders, they're learning about themselves, they're learning about other people, different lived experiences. And so I have the pleasure of doing that for one of the largest food companies in the world.
All right. So Pamay, we're going to start with you. Tell us a little bit about the intersection of learning and diversity.
Yeah, I guess I started answering the question before you asked it.
Right.
So many wonderful things happen at the intersection, and I think one of the joys of doing this work is you're able to help people understand what their values are, what they stand for, what their biases are, perhaps what they were raised with, what they need to learn and unlearn, and going through that process to become a more inclusive version of themselves. So of course we are talking, we are concerned about representation. We talk about community and education and compliance and celebration, but that process of being able to help people learn how to be more inclusive is key. I mean, you started out by saying, when did DEI become a four-letter word? I think a lot of what makes me feel fine about what's happening is everybody's on a learning journey. And so I am able to be in conversation with my peers in talent acquisition and talent management about the composition of our workforce, but also able to do things like create leadership accelerators for different populations in our organization, or allyship programs, or things that allow people to really figure out how to learn how to be part of and champions of the inclusive workplace. So that is the joy right there at the intersection between diversity and learning.
Right. So Melissa, we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, but what about identity, community, and belonging?
Yeah, I mean, I think when you are it doesn't really matter what word you use, and I love that this question follows talking about learning. I think, one, you need to start from kind of some foundations of none of this stuff is a destination. There is no end game to diversity or end game to belonging or end game to inclusion or whatever word you use. First of all, you need all of them. And to bring in the learning again, I think, and I hope that everyone can start from a place and say, I am a lifelong learner. I am continually curious, and all of those things put together, driven by curiosity, I think are going to be important. So when you say, what about those? I say, my short answer is they're all important, they're all necessary, but they all need to have some foundations of continual learning and curiosity.
Right. So DL, wanted to talk to you a little bit about, in light of the Supreme Court decision last year in Harvard, or involving Harvard and UNC, how should we rethink, or how are people rethinking what diversity is? So employees, recognize that it stands for inclusion of all.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And I think we're going to echo a lot of the comments from folks on stage. But let me first start by saying the sky is not falling when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion in the United States or even globally. I think it's only going to continue to grow because we've already identified numerous studies that show the power that comes from innovation of diverse teams that only increases when you add other diverse demographics to the nuances of who's in leadership, who's making key decisions, how you're comprising your teams. And that innovation leads to higher revenue and product profitability that many of our corporations appreciate on a regular basis, right? So I think what this opportunity and what the Supreme Court decision actually held and it's interesting, Melissa's comments, because some of the commentary in the decision said, well, there's no end to these diversity initiatives based on the current construct. This is a unique opportunity, I'd say, for our diversity, equity, inclusion industry to reset, because there is some validity to the fact that we've had these programs for years and years at a time, and we have seen, even in the legal industry, about 4 to 5% Black attorney representation, 2 to 3% Hispanic and Asian representation. So how do you create a system so that every stakeholder feels that they're seen, acknowledged, and an opportunity to engage in moving the initiative forward if we believe that diversity is good for business? So I think finding authentic pathways where you can connect, where your straight white man feels just as validated and included in the initiatives that you're doing, just as much as your other underrepresented groups might feel, is I think a key watershed moment, if you will, a tipping point that we have right now to correcting the industry.
Are there any particular conversations that are happening that sprang out of that case that both in-house and other counsel have had to say, these are some changes we're going to have to make?
No, absolutely. I'll give an example to that question that might help to illustrate. I was preparing for a client pitch. There are 4 attorneys involved. Due to some time constraints, not everyone was going to be able to make a presentation to the client. We know that the client appreciated diversity, And we appreciate diversity, so we're always looking for clients that want to advance our mutual interests in that respect. So he had a senior white male partner, a junior female associate, myself, and another junior white male partner. And when we divided the time, it was clear that the junior white male partner just agreed to, you know what, I'll be available for follow-up questioning. Well, we went in, we did the pitch. The client loved the diversity of our team, loved the diversity of our content, because of course at a baseline, everybody is qualified to be in that room and in that presentation. And we got even more business out of that pitch. And so I think when you approach something as, well, what am I getting it from my little piece of the pie? You're gonna miss the benefit and the value of what diversity can offer. But when you approach it as to how can we all work to increase opportunity that everyone can benefit from, your organizations benefit from it. And I think the diverse teams that particularly law firms provide give that sophistication that meets our client needs in a specific and unique way.
Got it. All right, Jeanette, I'm going to go to you. You've had experience at a lot of companies, a lot of large companies. So you've had the opportunity to see this conversation through through several different lenses. What can you tell us about sort of the managing the internal and external pressures around DEI work, given that you've been at Zurich, at Moto, at Walmart, and Walgreens, and I'm sure everybody's got a slightly different approach to that topic.
Sure. So thanks for the question. I'll start by saying that for the time that I've been in this space, I've always been in HR, but leading diversity, inclusion, equity, and belonging over multiple companies. The pressure today is different. I'll start by talking about the external pressures. The external pressures, like DI spoke to around, the Supreme Court decision and has caused, I think, a bit of concern within organizations, even though those decisions impacted college admissions. Companies are looking at that and really making sure that they're taking a second look at their programs to ensure that they're not excluding any particular group. And so we, like a lot of other organizations, are constantly meeting with our attorneys to understand what cases are pending out there with other organizations, and being truly transparent. No company wants to be that first company that's sued around some of these actions. And so the pressure externally is real, I will say that. Internally though, for us, what we have remained focused on is continuing to move forward with our programming. We have always paid attention to not excluding any particular group. We want everyone to be able to see themselves as a part of our strategy. And so we're continuing to do that. We've not taken our foot off the gas. We've continued with our programming, with our ERGs, with our leadership development programs, but certainly being cognizant that the programs do not exclude anyone. And I can say that that's true for all of the companies that I've worked for. The other piece that I'll mention is looking at your data, making sure that your actions and your programming is data-driven is very, very important. If you see that one group is being underutilized or underrepresented, then your programming should speak to that. And so that's what we're continuing to focus on, is really creating that inclusive culture where everyone feels that they can grow and that they can thrive.
Do the different companies respond to different forces when it comes to that conversation? Whether it's, if you've been at companies where it's there's much more of an external constituency than an internal constituency?
Well, so a couple of those companies are big consumer products companies. I don't have to name which ones are, by hearing those names. And so it's very important to make sure that you're looking at which, and so you're looking at that. I think for all of those companies, there is a level of commitment that the organization has around ensuring that they're not only their customers, if they're customer facing, that their customers are diverse, and that those folks who are coming to meet with those customers, though they're looking for diverse audiences to come and talk with them about products and things of that nature. So the expectation across all of these organizations is that you have diverse teams, you have diversity of thought, and they want to see that when you talk about, when you go in and you're talking with them about different opportunities with your organization.
So Another thing that comes up a lot in the conversation around DEI is the focus on unconscious bias. And want you to, I guess, give us some thoughts on why that's so critical and how that comes up.
I'm sorry, what's
Jeanette, you want to?
bias?
Yeah.
Certainly. So I'll talk a little bit about that. Bias isn't unconscious necessarily. We just recently launched a program at Zurich, North America around inclusion at Zurich. And one of the things we talk about is the different forms of bias. You know, halo bias, recency bias, all of the different types of bias that can occur. We all have them. We all have them. It's not that bias is bad. It's how you utilize that bias that becomes a problem. If you give preference for a particular bias that you have, then that's the challenge. But we all have biases. And being clear about talking about them, making sure that the organization is training people to understand what those biases are and how to utilize that and not act on it in a discriminatory way. But, you know, there's this notion that, you know, bias is all bad. It's how you use bias that makes it difficult.
Anybody else want to jump in on that?
I mean, I'll throw something in because I think one of the things that's really powerful is that when it's not just one person in the room who's like the bias buster. Like you look at the chief diversity officer, like, hey, could you tell us if any bias is happening? Versus, which is always uncomfortable, right? Versus you have leaders around the table, you have people who are they're trained, to your point, they practice recognizing and calling it out so that, I mean, I don't know, we've been in meetings for performance reviews and someone like, oh, you know, that's recency bias. And you're like, oh, thank goodness, everyone is thinking about this. So to your point, it is something that everybody has to deal with. And if you do it right, if you do the training right, if you have learning experiences around this, people are constantly checking for it. And so it doesn't have to be one person that's the one that's saying, hey, by the way, do you realize you're treating women different than men? Or do you realize you're treating this group different than this group? And everybody is actively, that's why I say amplifying the work that everybody is doing to become more inclusive. It just makes it all easier.
Is that conversation getting easier to have?
Is it getting easier? I mean, I think it's something, I mean, you asked, it's not, there's no end to this. Like at some point, hallelujah, everybody is done and we're diverse and everybody can go home, right? So I think there's a lot more kind of recognition that this needs to be a constant, I talk about practice a great deal. And I think when people are thinking about practicing, then it's just good. It's part of the conversation.
Well, and I was just thinking as you were talking about exactly what you're saying, that's like you kind of have this shared language around it. And I think of it kind of like whenever you're building like a muscle of something, right? Practice, whether it's playing an instrument or exercise or whatever. And I think that maybe it doesn't get easier, but it gets deeper. I was thinking about a conversation I had with someone on my team recently, and we were talking about this particular leader who is quite introverted and is up for, being considered for a promotion. And there had been some feedback around like, well, this person doesn't like speak out enough. This person isn't articulate enough, these kind of things. And what I loved about my team member, she said, I wonder if it might be an auditory processing challenge because there is a delay sometimes in the response this person gives. So there's maybe introversion might be the surface assumption, right? But being able to go deeper and understand more helps us to even know that she's thinking about that so that she can advise leaders on how to like be more inclusive in their consideration. And it's really about the impact this person's having, the output that they're delivering, and less about, are they the best person to grab the microphone and like charisma their way around things, right? Like that is a great skill to have, but it's not the only skill to have. So I was just thinking about like, to me, it's like, it's never done, but it should keep getting better and deeper and more meaningful over time.
I'll just add a little bit to that. Using inclusive language is very, very important. So one of the things I just heard you say, Andrea, is around saying that someone's very articulate. That's not always received as a compliment because there's perhaps who's saying it and how they're saying it. It may be perceived as, I don't expect that person to be articulate because perhaps of their background. So those are the kinds of things that we're teaching and we're working through. Say this, not that. So giving them some alternatives, ways to speak to that.
I love that we like backstage stage, we were talking about people could just say the things and say the words and say it, right? And your example is an example of like having the language to have that conversation. You just did it on stage, right? Like, how do we talk about these things? And I think a lot of times there's this like fear that becomes the barrier to any sort of growth or any sort of inclusion or belonging. But like, if we just say the words and say them in a respectful way, in a way that people can receive them, in a way that is a little bit more giving than shaming or demeaning, but like say the words, because if we don't say them, we're not going anywhere, we're not growing, we're not knocking down any of those barriers.
And that was the question I had around bias is, we've been talking about it for a while, and have we gotten to a point where people are now starting to talk about it a little more freely and either be less apprehensive, less defensive, and actually start to have the conversation? Labeling it's fine, but are we actually starting to talk about it in a way that helps move the needle?
I mean, reminders are always great. One of the things that we do at Kraft Heinz is before the performance reviews, we do learning experiences around bias every year. So, if you're at the company for 5 years, 10 years, maybe you've gone through it a couple times, but I don't ever expect someone to be an expert, right? So before you go in and talk about somebody's career and their future, we're gonna remind you of the different kinds of bias. We're gonna give you something that you can hang your hat on. So it's not just somebody thinking, I think that's bias, but I don't remember if it's recency bias or if it's the halo effect, so I can't call it. We just had a session on that. So I think it is just making it part of the kind of the cadence of your organization that you keep talking about it. That way nobody has to kind of guess or worry. So I don't know, I really come back to like, there's no end. It's just you're continuing to become a better leader, a better inclusive human. That's the journey that we're all on as humans.
Right.
If I could just underscore, it's so important, Pamay, I think you just said the point of including this in regular cycles in your organization. Before promotion meetings, do the like bias, because it's a primer, right? It makes you more attuned to think about it. And honestly, I think you have to, I usually say you have to exemplify the culture you want to see replicated throughout your organization. Right. And I've been in meetings myself where I have had to catch myself. I think this is a safe space. Assigning work or asking, I've got an Asian female attorney who works with me, also an Arab American attorney who works with me. We were doing like a whole team debrief about this crazy case that we're working on. And my first thought was like to ask the female, you guys know where this is going, to take notes while I'm like running quickly through like the agenda, what we do. Self-caught myself, and I called it out actually to my team. And I said, hey, you know what? I didn't realize that I just did that, but just caught myself. And I reassigned who was taking notes. And so I think there's a level of like, as leaders, you have to be willing to be vulnerable. You got to be willing to be wrong and then like call yourself out on it. But that authenticity is what I hope like my team resonates with. I hope that, the organization as a whole is able to continue to replicate.
I love that modeling that you did. Right, in the moment, just saying, oh, I messed up and like the world did not end and I corrected myself, and I think that's awesome.
We practice calling people in.
Oh,
So creating that
There you
inclusion.
go.
So we want to call you in. Let's have a little bit of a conversation around that. So
Call you into the group, call you into the principal's office? What are we doing?
it could just be a conversation. Could be
Some of the
anytime.
best advice I got when I took on this diversity role from a mentor, they said, if you do this work right, it will change you. And my lived experience, I come from an underrepresented, a population that's underrepresented in corporate spaces. And I'm like, well, I've been doing this work for my whole life. And she said, you will not believe the amount of times you'll check yourself and be like, oh, okay, maybe that wasn't the most inclusive thought. And so I think it's constant, it's forever. It is, you're becoming a better human and not looking at just your lived experience, but those that are unfamiliar to you, and then continuing to call people in. Mm-hmm. And even like all of us, I would imagine, I'm going to speak for everybody, are constantly doing that.
Absolutely.
And modeling it for others. And then it's easier to expect it from other people because you're doing the work to become a more inclusive leader.
I think the other thing I think about is it's not sound bites, right? It's not, like you said some really key things there, in my opinion, being willing to be real and be vulnerable in order to be innovative. And that, like, you see those kind of quotes, right? It's like the posters in the office. But the truth is, all that is super messy and very stressful and can be very intense. And so being willing to kind of like be real about that, I think is really powerful. And I think the more that we do model that, the more other people are comfortable saying, oh gosh, and sometimes like when you look at the systemic challenges of language, of processes, of, hierarchy, you almost feel like, how can I ever escape this, right? But being able to kind of talk about it and find those little tangible ways to change it and to model what that looks like, I think can be maybe more powerful than programmatic kind of, big posters and, experiences.
Do you feel like we've had any success in lowering the temperature in the room enough that people can have conversations, can make mistakes, and it doesn't become this, all or nothing sort of moment where you can't believe somebody said that because you're at risk of failure or you're at risk of suffering, big consequences. Are we getting better at lowering that temperature enough to say oops or whatever?
I'll start. Sure. So one of the things that we're working on is truly how to make sure that we're driving for this culture and giving people grace. Where you call someone in, perhaps, and you have that conversation, but the person doesn't feel like, oh my God, I just made this tremendous mistake. Now, if you keep doing it, that's a different question.
Right.
But giving people grace, because you can't expect that folks are going to go through whatever training or experience and then walk away with all the answers, because they won't. What you want to do, though, at least what we're focused on, is making sure that people aren't intentional. And oftentimes it's not that they're intentional to be creating this kind of disengagement, but they don't know. I mean, we put together actually a list of say this, not this. And there were many people as we're going through it, and we still haven't completed the rollout, but as we're going through it, you'd be surprised, common phrases that people say, they didn't realize that could be offensive to a group or to a person. Right. If I said some of them, I'm sure many of you would say, oh, didn't realize that, or many of you might. But it's really education. It's a big part of the education and training that you have to do in your organizations. I think the temperature is coming down a little bit. I do think I'm hopeful that we're seeing progress in the space of D&I across organizations.
John, I would just pick up a couple comments on what Andrea said also, and that's that you can pass all the policies and procedures that you want when it comes to diversity initiatives. But I really think relationship drives significant change, because that levels the playing field. It gives you a basis of trust. You're gonna give somebody the benefit of the doubt when they make a mistake. You're gonna advocate more on their behalf when you have that level of relationship. So I think the temperature lowering in the room is really driven by our intentionality to build relationship across our personal and professional networks when it comes to these issues.
Yeah, I think I totally agree. And one of the things I was sitting here thinking about is the generations in the workforce, right? I mean, you think about the spread of that. And at Talkspace, we're relatively small, definitely compared to some of the big companies on the stage, but we represent all those from, Boomer all the way through Gen Z. And that means that sometimes people will step in it, right? Either way, right? And not making assumptions that was ever intentional, and really be able to have those kind of conversations and build the relationships. And I think for me, I just keep coming back to what are some of the practical, everyday things that we can do? And I think a big part of it when we look at, we were talking earlier behind the stage, and it was Gen Z and how they're really, I think you were talking about how they're really leading the way with mental health and therapy. And they're talking about something that has really always been kind of hidden or not allowed to be discussed. And my point of view is it's not like mental health is suddenly a new need or a new challenge. It's just that I think this new generation in the workforce is not willing to accept the silence on it. And I actually think it's one of those, I forget the term, but when you think about curb cuts in the sidewalk, right? Those were meant for somebody who may have a need for a wheelchair. But every single one of us benefits from that, right? So if you push a stroller, it's a whole lot easier to do that when you have that curb cut. And I think that's similar with therapy. I think that, Gen Z may be the ones vocalizing it and setting the standards for it. But what we're seeing at Talkspace is that every generation in the country is going to benefit from greater access to mental health and from removing some of that stigma around what does it mean to talk about it. It doesn't have to mean that it's a crisis or the sky is falling. It could just be, you're trying to take care of your mental health the same way you might take care of your physical health. And I just think that for us, as we think about like, so how do you bring that to life? Like, what does that actually look like? A couple silly examples that I think, again, I sometimes come back to just like really like basic things. Like we do an all hands. We're a fully virtual company. So we're based in New York, but we've got folks all over the country and all different time zones, all different generations, all that. And probably many of you have the same. And so we do a monthly all hands with, all of our therapists who are employees and all of our, corporate employees. And even just thinking about what's the song, what's the video of music we want to kick the meeting off with, right? Like that sounds so silly and little, but we try to do that in a representative way. That's like, sometimes we have a lot of disco. It's interesting. Somebody on my team loves disco and she is a Gen Zer. So that's an interesting observation. But like we try to have a lot of different artists and music. We even think about things like as we're introducing new employees, she intentionally makes sure she knows how to pronounce their name, how they like to be referred to. It's just like those little things that every day we're trying to find a way to make people feel like they're part of our Talkspace team. And that no matter what generation they're from or no matter what their background is, like they can come here and feel safe to be authentic and to sometimes maybe get it wrong and find a way to get it right. So I do think that generational difference can be messy, but very powerful as well.
Does that have any big implications for just DEI in general of the wide, we may have the widest spectrum now generationally in the workplace that we've ever had. Good thing, bad thing, does it help?
I think it's good. I think, all of us have sort of touched on this, but like when you talk about words like diversity or even when you talk about that spectrum of ages, that's very surface level, but that's all more and different kinds of inputs that go into what does actual inclusion mean for our organization? What does belonging actually mean for our organization? So I think the more nuanced, the better. Whenever I talk about it, I always have to do this with my hands because it's like how like this amoeba of belonging that like comes out and like, here you're this, you're this, you're this, you're this, you're this, and you're this. I'm not just a woman, right? There is so much more to who I am and what I bring to the table. So I think that age span is amazing. I also think, we talk a lot about, the word binary, you're either here or you're here. And to me, like the real work is in the messy middle. And, not being in that, like, you're old or you're young, you're a man or you're a woman, you are this or you're that, but like in that messy middle of what really does make you up. So I think that age span only helps in what we're trying to do.
I completely agree. I remember a few years back, I actually did a reverse mentoring, and I had someone who was earlier in career, who was the person I spent a little bit of time with to better understand some of the things around social media and all the other things, and how there's certain groups that don't want to be categorized. Like they don't want to be generalized about here's what Gen Z likes or here's what they don't like. And so it was really a good learning opportunity for me. So I think it's great to have the 5 generations in the workplace today.
I would say in some ways it's great or it's not great. Diversity is a fact. It's happening, right? So, not to say that the things that you said were not valid, but I think a lot of the times when we're talking about a diverse workforce or diverse world, it's happening. So whether or not you choose to learn how to engage in a respectful manner or not, there are people from different lived experiences, different characteristics, different backgrounds, different ages. I can go through all the dimensions of diversity. And if you want to have a community or an organization where there's less friction and more productivity, then there is a reason to learn how to be a more inclusive leader. So, I could be like, oh, wow, 6 generations, that's a lot of work. Or I can say, wow, this is how I, in my generation, saw things, and I know that people who may be older or younger may be seeing things differently, and it probably will be better for me as a leader, and I look at my team that is diverse in whatever way to figure out how to engage in a productive manner. So I love that the phrase diversity is a fact, like it's happening, and so however you choose to deal with it is hopefully productive, and what we are all working towards, making sure we're having productive workplaces in a productive world.
I'm simply wondering if if you're having a conversation about being inclusive, if there are more groups to include, that it just makes that more of a reality, more of a necessity.
Well, and I think too,
makes it happen faster.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I was just thinking what Melissa said about that messy middle or that intersectionality. To me, in some ways, it's less about segmenting groups and more about recognizing those intersections.
Right.
And sometimes that can be, again, more practical in the way you're talking about. If I think about myself, I identify as a woman, I identify as a mom, I identify as a lesbian, I identify as a sister. I mean, there's so many things, right? And I think being able to talk about all those things is a lot more multidimensional than maybe the way it was, 10 or 15 years ago when we're talking about these. So I think in some ways it makes it simpler, not easier, but simpler sometimes to have those conversations.
So let's stay with the inclusivity topic for just a minute. Pamay, tell me about how we manage to be inclusive, but also recognize individuals and individual achievement.
Yeah. I think, inclusion or belonging.
Right.
Inclusion is a choice. I'm choosing to engage with you. You're telling me who you are. I'm choosing to be curious, to learn about how you like to be referred to, how you like to engage. Belonging is the outcome, right? So we all feel like, I can bring myself to this space. I can bring my talents, my experiences. I can contribute. I can be vulnerable or not. I always like to say, bring your whole self to work if you want to, and if you don't, bring whatever you want, right? So everyone doesn't want to bring their whole self to work. But within that, there are still humans who have their own lives, their own stories, their own. So there's no reason why it has to be mixed to the point where I cannot see you, right? I think we're all trying to create spaces where people feel like they can contribute, but that still means that there are humans who have values that are very important to them, who have experiences that they would like to share. So I think it's not an or, it's an and. To be able to see the people for who they are and create spaces where they feel like they can belong and be included.
I would just say, I think it's a simple lesson. So many times you get in these conversations and folks try and take that colorblind approach. Well, I just don't see color, or I don't see your category that you fill in the blank. And I just liken it to when you pick out flowers for any given occasion, they're all flowers, but you pick out different flowers for a purpose. You might pick out roses, lilies. I don't want to go down the list of all that are available, but there's an intrinsic value and beauty to each one. And I think you can recognize that in every demographic and every diversity category, that being a Black male of whatever generation, et cetera, is an intrinsic value. And how we find, I think I love how you said it, the touch points or the intersections where at the end of the day, I think there's so much more intergenerationally between every demographic that we have in common than what separates us. And focusing on that is, I think, how we generate the inclusion. We generate and foster a culture of belonging that has significant benefit.
All right. So, Melissa, I want to come back to you for a second. You've talked a few times about the importance of language. And you talk about the distinction between resonance and representation. Tell us a little bit about what that is and why it matters.
Sure. So when I was talking earlier about what I do and how we are helping teams and brands kind of connect with people more, right? And in order to connect with people more, you really need to move more into resonance. So representation is kind of like the word diversity, right? It's very visual, forward facing. What do I see? What can I tell about you? If you look at me, I'm a woman, right? So that would be an example of diversity. Resonance is when you really start to understand that person. And I work at an advertising agency, used to be a creative director, so I'm obviously trying to sell things to people, which means I need to understand them. I need to know what drives them, what moves them, why are they going to choose this product over this product, where are they going to look on shelf, how are they going to walk out the door after seeing a TV spot and buy this thing, or how am I going to stick with them? That's resonance. That's really understanding people. That's what everyone here has talked about today when it comes to like that deeper level understanding. And it's important to, from an HR perspective, to really think about, I'm not just looking at the data at a surface level and saying, oh, okay, I've got, this department is 51% female, 49% male, therefore, great, we got diversity, right? Like, okay, sorta. Also, I'm not sure if I did that math right because I'm not a math person, but hopefully that doesn't stop my point I'm trying to make, right? Looking at the data and being more, okay, well, who are the people that make up this department and how are we dissecting it in a deeper way that is not just that surface level? So that's the difference of representation and resonance. It's important because it's about understanding, and I can't remember which one of you talked about that intentionality in the understanding, right? Again, so there's been a lot of talk today about surveys and feedback, and like all of that is really great, but what are you doing to really understand that data and understand the behaviors behind that data?
Right. Well, we're going to leave it there. I want to thank my panel for a wonderful discussion and thank all of you.